law enforcement side believes that he died of a drug overdose. And they're like, see? There you go. Okay? Drug overdose. I mean, come on. So he's not guilty. Like it's gonna determine whether you support law enforcement or not. The other side believes that positional asphyxiation makes Chauvin guilty. I say doesn't matter. The reason we need to get it right is that it does not follow the pattern of any of the other situations where police were brought up on charges. Very few of them, because it indicates someone who was impervious to bystanders. And hear me out. In a court of law, justice is blind, so that George Floyd's record would not be admissible in court, even though they may have had testimony about his drug use because it was part of the autopsy. His prior record is not relevant because does someone deserve to be treated as less than because of what they did in the past? No, I do not think that is how the American system works and a constitutional democracy works. Why? Even if we say he gave the police trouble, and we all saw the additional video which had been withheld by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Even if it was held, we all saw it. I think it's irrelevant and moot that he was resisting in the car. And I'll tell you why. And the bottom line is, as we saw in the trial and as we saw before, this man was in need of medical attention. And yes, I agree with those who support law enforcement, as I support law enforcement. I agree that these officers are often stretched to the maximum and that they need to have our support. That said, justice must be done individually for each situation. And so I understand that officers are burdened and they're not mental health counselors and they're not meant to be. However, we've had enough accidental killings and shootings, maybe not so accidental, of mentally ill people, whatever race, of mentally ill Americans, that we should really be taking a look at mental illness brought on by drugs or, being in an altered state. We have had an autistic young man named Elijah McClain who ended up dying in police care, custody, but, they didn't take him to jail, but he ended up dying as they were trying to take him in because he was not responding. He was listening to music on his headphones, and somebody had called saying he was dancing around erratically, but really he was autistic. And this was a very sensitive soul. I believe he was a cello player, and he was also Black. And so this really hit the community there in Colorado very hard. And yet there have also been many white Americans who were mentally ill and were also killed in police custody. So what am I saying? I'm not sitting here saying that George Floyd isn't accountable for his actions, because he is. But do you really think it's reasonable that overdosing on drugs should mean that you shouldn't be saved like anyone else who might be observed to be overdosing? Sadly, the timing was very bad as far as the counterfeit bill. And what I've always thought about that is you don't know where he got the counterfeit bill from. He may or may not have known that it was counterfeit. I also have always felt that the pandemic accelerated George Floyd's decline. I even think that being out of work as a bouncer at a nearby bar was really debilitating for him. The girlfriend testified that they had spiraled down into drugs, and I think it was a fairly recent situation that had developed, but even if it wasn't, doesn't matter. There's a level of callousness on the part of Derek Chauvin that caused him to remain with his knee and full weight on Floyd's neck during the entire time he was apparently filling out paperwork. Now, I've seen this before. Just like every other group of people, you have great people and you have real assholes, people who shouldn't be probably dealing with the public. And when I've been in situations with police, sadly, I've seen that there are times where they seem to lord it over. The ones I have encountered seem to lord it over those that they feel are bad people or criminals. I was suspected of having ecstasy in my car, which I never would ever have, and I was treated very unfairly outside a rave in Los Angeles more than 10 years ago. because I had nothing to hide, I just maintained, that I had nothing to hide. I allowed them to search the car and they didn't find anything, but the attitude was actually quite frightening. And they kept telling me I was going to jail and that I was lying. We can always do better. And like I said in a recent column of mine, if we really want to be great and be that shining city on the hill that has always been our potential with our American system, then we want to be a place where even if somebody is not in their right mind or is kind of surfing that tragic edge or is, getting into a lot of trouble, shouldn't be thinking that the punishment will be way, way more than the crime. You read about hoodlums or, young kids, they're wild and crazy and then they grow up and it kind of goes away. You don't hear about the police back in the 50s and 60s just killing people. Now, I have absolutely no idea if that's just because of the way coverage has been. I'm sure there were a lot of cover-ups of law enforcement, accidents, mishaps, and other things. People in power tend to cover things up. Now, this has nothing to do with the very real need for supporting the rule of law and law enforcement. After all, the equal application of the law is supremely important, and this is why I think the Derek Chauvin trial has been a really good example of a situation needing to be seen on its own merit, as opposed to people simply weighing in where they always fall. Now, we have been so divided partially because the media is very, very worried about being accused of being racist, and or they are pushing an agenda. I mean, you can see it right there. You're not supposed to say the race of anyone in a crime story, but lo and behold, the last year or two, we've been seeing that the word white is used in headlines, and especially, if the victim was a person of color. But there are other situations where maybe the perpetrator is black, and of course they're not going to say it because you're not supposed to say it. Also, I've looked at the numbers, and people think that white males are the biggest threat to this society in, generations, whatever they say, but that's just simply not true. Statistically, I would never use the statistic about which race commits the most crime as a way to put down any race. But the fact is that more than 50% of crimes are now crimes that are apprehended. Those who are apprehended are Black Americans. I'm sure there are other races that get away with a lot. I'm sure there are also Black Americans that get away with a lot. And I do think that the harassment of this demographic, there's pressure to arrest, there's pressure to convict, there's pressure to prosecute. And these youths and these people of color they don't have the money to get a decent lawyer or to have influence over the judge. While we do have wealthy and privileged Black Americans as well, the fact remains that there's a vast majority of the Black Americans in this country who only make up 13% of everyone. The vast majority of them are suffering in generations of poverty and from the breakdown of the family that began even during slavery. And I recommend reading some books about slavery. It's very, very eye-opening because the family unit was very important to our Black citizens, and there were many free Blacks who convinced the white abolitionists that this was their country too, because some white abolitionists just wanted to say, well, let's just take you back to your homeland, even if they were well-meaning. It's back to Africa is not a good look. But that's what a lot of them were thinking, and the Black citizens who were determined to have full rights and privileges promised by the Constitution, they are the ones who persevered, and they convinced the white abolitionists up in New England to also fight for full rights and privileges as full citizens. It was a long time coming, and we've seen Jim Crow, how devastating that has been, segregation. We saw the ending of that. And so now we are dealing with a situation where we're actually risking a very great danger if we do not require of our Black citizens the same observance of the rule of law as we require of our white citizens, we will be truly lost. And every case will be simply about media omitting important details. And I'm not just talking about a rap sheet. I'm not talking about somebody's prior crimes at all. I'm talking about somebody's current crimes, like the way that many of these situations have been distorted to the point where, with Breonna Taylor, for example, I'll just say, it was not the wrong place at all. That is a complete fallacy that has been perpetuated in the media since March 13th, 2020, that horrible night. There is plenty of evidence, and I have it in my possession, from a leaked police report showing Breonna Taylor sadly was involved in the gathering of drug profits, stashing it, of driving with her sometime boyfriend to the stash house to stash whatever drugs. And the whole line that everybody feels is that police thought she was receiving packages that were addressed to her ex-boyfriend, but that wasn't actually true. A lot of articles just tried to minimize. They said there was a postal worker who said that wasn't true. It was just a very, very strange, because her ex-boyfriend, he did use her apartment as his address. He used it to get a bank account, and she also bailed him out of jail after a drug bust. They were just recently hanging out. And then her current boyfriend, who was there the night she was killed, Kenneth Walker, he also was selling drugs. Now, had he ever been arrested for a illegal firearm or for drugs? No. But the evidence shows that he was selling drugs. He was selling opioids, pills, and I think weed. He also had a Glock, as everybody knows, that was legally registered to him. So why not just tell the whole story? He was obviously involved in some shady business. Not as much as Jamarcus, her ex-boyfriend, who she was also seeing just in a few weeks before her death. But she had also been bailing out Jamarcus and helping him. And he admits this on tapes of phone calls with his associates from jail. So what they don't realize is the reason they actually did knock, and the reason they knocked, is that they felt like they didn't want to surprise them like they would in a no-knock warrant, because they knew it was someone who was basically just carrying money for them and probably wasn't armed and dangerous. Well, little did they know that somebody who had nothing to do with the primary drug ring that they were investigating would have been armed. And so, yes, it was bungled, but it wasn't botched like people think. Like, this was this person upstanding citizen who was just shot at in her bed in the middle of the night, and she had done nothing wrong. And they just thought her ex-boyfriend was sending packages to her, but there was no evidence of that. Not true at all. Okay, so with Derek Chauvin, let's get back to that. This person, I have always felt, was wielding power, and I think that he deserves to be punished for not listening to people who were saying that this man was suffering, he needed medical attention, and simply not being aware, kind of having an attitude that resulted in somebody who was truly suffering eventually succumbing to the various stressors on him. Now, as far as the medical experts go, it's absolutely clear that each side, the law enforcement side, believes that he died of a drug overdose. And they're like, see, there you go, okay? Drug overdose. I mean, come on. So he's not guilty. Like it's gonna determine if you believe Derek Chauvin is not guilty, that means you support law enforcement. But if you believe that he did something wrong, then you're part of the problem. Similarly, the other side believes that saying that he died of positional asphyxiation makes Chauvin guilty. I say doesn't matter. He had more than lethal levels of fentanyl in his body, as well as methamphetamine. Well, he did have an enlarged heart. Even the Hennepin County medical examiner said that he had an enlarged heart, but the clip that made the headlines was that he said there was nothing abnormal about his heart otherwise, apparently. I guess there can be damage to the different chambers, but even the medical examiner for the prosecution said that he had shrunken arteries. So the cause of death To me, it could have been equally both things. It could have been more so the knee on the neck. It could have been more so the overdose, but he could have been saved if he got medical attention. And that's the thing, that's the rub. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. This has happened a lot. Elijah McClain in Colorado, he died because they gave him a shot of ketamine. Apparently he was really struggling, and they were trying to bring him in because he was autistic and probably was totally freaked out by being touched. So, you know what? It's okay to want to reform. I think we can find more non-lethal means of disabling people. And if we don't have that invented now, I'm sure we can invent it very soon. But I've heard of stuff like that. So let's get on the stick. Let's not defund the police. Let's get rid of the ones who have really bad, condescending attitudes toward anyone they think is a lowlife or whatever else, bad cops. Let's bring in more recruits. Let's train them for this new element. Let's not act like if you have a different opinion, then you're automatically a huge part of the problem. Let's acknowledge that there are valid arguments and valid things that we need to acknowledge on the other side. That is what America is all about. I do think he needs to be convicted of manslaughter, if not third-degree murder. And that's where the health record or the cause of death, to me, maybe it's relevant in that if he actually died of just being crushed, then it would be maybe first-degree murder. But we all know that the levels of fentanyl, they were like 4 times as much as even a normal lethal dose, like 9 nanograms in his blood. So we know that it wasn't just from positional asphyxiation. So that's why I say manslaughter, because he should have gotten him medical attention. And there should never be another police officer again who ignores warning signs, who can't be bothered to sort of think outside the box, God forbid, and or just use common sense. It has nothing to do with feeling sorry for him, just using common sense and watching his own ass. If he had gotten him medical attention and the guy was subdued, he shouldn't have been sat on with handcuffs on either. You know, that's not okay. So let's just take a balanced approach instead of saying, you know, oh, love life shouldn't have anything. One more thing, which people say I always don't mention. The personal responsibility piece for those who are acting in an erratic and irresponsible and criminal manner and making criminal choices, that needs to be acknowledged, because you need to learn how to stay alive. If you want to flee the police and you got away once, don't try to get away again, because that once was a fluke. Now, Dante Wright, I read the report on a couple of different encounters the police had with him. One was where he was waving a pistol around. He had a warrant out for that when he was apprehended on the Sunday that he died. The whole rest of the report, though, is that police came and apprehended him for waving a pistol around, and then he fled. He actually dumped the gun in somebody's car and fled on foot. And the police lost him, and he was very lucky. And I think what happens to some of these young people is they think, well, I got away, you know, old school. I got away, so I'm going to get away next time too. I'm not going to jail. Maybe it's not necessarily thinking rationally, but if you let people get away with getting away, then they're going to repeat it. If you let them get away with getting away, and they don't realize how serious that situation is, we will have lawlessness around the entire country. And it's already in the inner cities. It's just that privileged white liberals, they don't deal with it. They're not scared. They're not scared every single night, every single moment, because of the neighborhood that they live in. It's a very real thing. You cannot let people believe that they can just, you know, screw around with the police. Let's try to meet in the middle. There's nothing wrong with being in the middle. It is not fence sitting. It's looking past the bull and finding solutions. So thanks for watching and have a great evening. Until next time. Bye-bye.